What if the only person who could bring a murderer to justice was the victim herself, speaking from beyond the grave? Imagine being trapped in a nightmare, knowing the person you love is about to take your life. Imagine feeling the searing pain of fire consuming your body while your attacker stands there, watching. Now imagine surviving, not because fate was kind, but because you refused to let your story die with you. This is the story of Judy Malinowski, a woman who turned her suffering into strength and ensured her killer faced justice even after she was gone. On August 2, 2015, the quiet evening air in Gahanna, Ohio, was shattered by frantic screams and the crackling of fire. At a Speedway gas station, 31-year-old Judy Malinowski was engulfed in flames, her body a living torch. Witnesses watched in horror as she collapsed to the pavement, her flesh seared beyond recognition. Paramedics arrived swiftly, rushing her to the hospital, where doctors assessed the unimaginable damage. 90% of her body burned. Her boyfriend, Michael Slager, stood nearby, offering a strange explanation that she had accidentally set herself on fire while lighting a cigarette. But the truth, far more sinister, would soon unravel. Judy wasn't just another tragic victim. She was a fighter. And in the most extraordinary way, she would make sure her voice was heard, even after death. Subscribe to Crime Docket for more bone-chilling stories like this, where justice is fought for, the truth is revealed, and the voices of the victims live on. On August 2, 2015, the quiet evening air in Gahanna, Ohio was thick with the sense of gasoline and summer heat. The Speedway gas station, usually just another stop for weary travelers, late-night workers, and hurried parents, became the scene of an unthinkable horror. It started with an argument. Witnesses later recalled seeing Judy and her boyfriend, Michael Slager, engaged in a heated dispute near his truck. Their voices rose above the hum of passing cars and the occasional ding of the gas pumps. Judy, a mother of two, was no stranger to Slager's temper, but this time it was different, more volatile and dangerous. Then, in the blink of an eye, the fight escalated into something beyond comprehension. Slager, his face twisted with rage, grabbed a red gas canister from the back of his vehicle. The motion was swift, almost practiced. Without hesitation, he doused Judy in gasoline. For a second, time seemed to freeze. The onlookers at the station barely registered what had happened until the sharp, acrid scent of fuel filled the air, coating their throats with its chemical bite. Someone gasped. Someone else started to move, unsure whether to intervene or call for help. But before anyone could react, before Judy herself could fully process the horror of what had just been done to her, Slager reached into his pocket. He pulled out a lighter. The small flame flickered in the evening light for a fraction of a second, just enough time for Judy's eyes to widen in terror. Then, he flicked it toward her. The moment the fire made contact with the gasoline-soaked fabric of her clothes, an explosion of heat and light consumed her. A whooshing sound, like the roar of an inferno, filled the air. Within seconds, Judy was engulfed. Flames crawled over her body, hungrily devouring her clothes, her skin, her hair. The heat was unbearable, a force so intense that those standing nearby felt their own skin prickle in response. Screams tore through the night. Judy staggered back, arms flailing as she tried to fight off the fire. But there was nothing to fight. It was everywhere, wrapping her in its merciless embrace. Her body was no longer her own. It belonged to the fire now. She ran. Desperation propelled her forward, past the gas pumps, past the onlookers who could do nothing but stare in shock. She didn't scream, not at first. The pain was so overwhelming that her body couldn't even process it. Then, as the flames melted through her clothes and licked at her bare skin, the first agonizing cries escaped her lips. A store clerk inside the Speedway gas station saw her through the glass and dialed 911 with shaking hands. "A woman is on fire! She's on fire!" The employee shouted into the phone, the words spilling out in frantic disbelief. A bystander, finally jolted into action, grabbed a fire extinguisher from his truck and ran toward her. The white cloud of chemicals burst from the nozzle, coating Judy's body as he frantically tried to put out the flames. Another man threw his jacket over her, trying to smother the fire. Judy collapsed onto the pavement. The fire was finally out, but the damage was done. Her skin, where it still remained, was blackened and peeling. Patches of raw, Exposed flesh glistened under the gas station lights. Her blonde hair, once falling in soft waves around her face, was gone, burned away in an instant. The stench of charred flesh hung heavy in the air, and yet she was alive. Paramedics arrived within minutes, but even seasoned emergency responders were shaken by what they saw. Judy was burned beyond recognition, her features barely distinguishable beneath the layers of scorched skin and melted tissue. The pain must have been unbearable, yet she was conscious. Her lips moved, whispering something inaudible. A paramedic leaned in closer. "He did this to me," she breathed. The words were weak but unmistakable. Michael Slager stood nearby, his expression disturbingly calm. As police officers approached him, he raised his hands as if to feign innocence. "It was an accident," he said quickly. "She was smoking a cigarette. The gas caught fire." His story didn't make sense. Witnesses had seen him arguing with Judy. They had seen the gas can in his hands. Some even saw the lighter. But in the chaos of the moment, as Judy was rushed to the hospital, Slager's lies were enough to buy him time. Judy was loaded into the ambulance, her burned body wrapped in sterile sheets to prevent further infection. Inside the vehicle, paramedics worked frantically to stabilize her. Her breathing was shallow, her pulse weak. The human body was not designed to withstand such catastrophic burns. The lead medic turned to the others and shook his head grimly. "She won't make it," he muttered. "No one survives this." As the ambulance sped toward the hospital, Judy's eyes fluttered open once more. Through the haze of pain and medication, she thought of her two young daughters, thought of her mother, Bonnie, thought of all the things left unsaid, all the moments she wasn't ready to lose. The darkness was closing in, but she wasn't ready to go just yet. Subscribe to Crime Docket for more bone-chilling stories like this, where justice is fought for, the truth is revealed, and the voices of the victims live on. Michael Slager had always been a volatile man. Those who knew him saw glimpses of his temper, but only Judy understood the full extent of his cruelty. Behind closed doors, he was a different person, a master manipulator, a skilled liar, and a man who thrived on control. He didn't just demand obedience, he forced it with his fists, his words, and his unrelenting psychological torment. Judy had endured his abuse for years, wearing long sleeves to hide the bruises, perfecting her smile so no one would see the fear in her eyes. But despite the terror that ruled her life, she had found moments of hope. She had finally decided to leave him, to break free from the cycle of pain. And that, more than anything, was what made Michael snap. The night of the attack was supposed to be an ordinary one. Judy had stopped at a gas station, a place she had visited countless times before. She stood at the pump, lost in her thoughts, wondering if she had made a mistake by telling Michael she was done with him. She should have known he wouldn't let her go so easily. Michael arrived out of nowhere, his truck screeching into the lot like a predator hunting its prey. The moment she saw him, her stomach dropped. His face was twisted with fury, his eyes wild. He stepped out, moving with the confidence of a man who believed he was untouchable. Security footage would later reveal the harrowing details of what happened next. Michael stormed toward Judy, his voice already raised, his hands clenched into fists. He backed her against the pump, his words a barrage of accusations and threats. She tried to stay calm, tried to defuse the situation, but he was beyond reasoning. He grabbed a gas can from the back of his truck. At first, Judy didn't understand what he was doing. Then, in one horrifying moment, she felt the cold splash of gasoline soaking her clothes. The smell filled her nostrils, thick and suffocating. Her breath hitched as she realized what was happening. "Michael, please," she begged, her voice barely above a whisper. But he wasn't listening. He was past the point of no return. He pulled a lighter from his pocket, holding it up as if taunting her. The flame flickered, reflecting in his soulless eyes. Then, without hesitation, he flicked it toward her. The moment the flame met her gasoline-soaked clothing, the fire roared to life, devouring her in an instant. The heat was unbearable, searing her skin, consuming her flesh. She screamed the sound, a piercing, gut-wrenching wail that echoed through the gas station. She stumbled backward, flailing, trying desperately to put out the flames. Her hands slapped against her body, but it was useless. The fire spread too fast. Her hair ignited, the acrid smell of burning flesh and fuel filling the air. A bystander ran toward her, his jacket in hand. He tackled her to the ground, smothering the flames as best as he could. Others rushed to help, their voices frantic and their eyes wide with horror. Someone screamed for an ambulance. Through the agony and the blinding pain, Judy's mind clung to one thought: Michael did this to me. Judy survived the initial attack, but the damage was irreversible. Over 90% of her body had suffered third-degree burns. She was unrecognizable, her once vibrant skin replaced with raw, blistered wounds. She was placed into a medically induced coma, her body too fragile to endure the pain of consciousness. Michael, meanwhile, played the part of the concerned partner. He spun a web of lies, claiming it was all an accident that Judy had somehow done this to herself. But the security footage told the truth. The police had no choice but to arrest him. Despite the overwhelming evidence, the legal system failed Judy. Michael Slager was convicted, but his sentence was a slap on the wrist. Just 11 years for aggravated arson and assault. 11 years for the life he had stolen, for the suffering he had inflicted. Judy never got to tell her story. She succumbed to her injuries, her body unable to withstand the trauma. Her voice had been silenced, but the evidence remained. The security footage, the witnesses, the burn patterns, all of it screamed for justice. But justice never came. Michael Slager would eventually walk free, his hands unscarred, his body untouched by the flames he had set. He would move on, perhaps even find another victim, but those who knew the truth would never forget. Judy's story would live on, a haunting reminder of the monster of her past. 7 months after the attack, when all hope seemed lost, a miracle happened. Judy woke up. The doctors had not expected it. The damage to her body was catastrophic, her organs failing one by one. The medical staff had whispered among themselves, trying to prepare her family for the inevitable. Yet somehow, she clawed her way back from the brink of death. When her eyes fluttered open in the dimly lit hospital room, the nurses gasped in disbelief. The woman who had been declared all but gone had returned. Bonnie Bowes, Judy's mother, had spent months sitting beside her daughter's bed, her hands clutching Judy's lifeless fingers, praying for the impossible. Now, as Judy's eyelids flickered and her lips parted in a weak attempt to speak, Bonnie choked on a sob. "Judy?" she whispered, leaning over her, afraid that if she spoke too loudly, this fragile moment would shatter like glass. Judy's lips barely moved, her voice nothing more than a breath. But there was no mistaking what she said. "Mom." Tears streamed down Bonnie's face as she kissed her daughter's bandaged hand. The impossible had happened. Judy had defied death itself. But the battle was far from over. Judy couldn't move much. Every inch of her body was wrapped in bandages, her skin a patchwork of grafts and scars. The fire had stolen her beauty, her mobility, her independence, but it had not stolen her will to fight. Her throat burned with every breath, the damage from smoke inhalation still raw. Even the simple act of speaking was excruciating, each word feeling like it was being dragged over shards of glass. But when they brought in a recorder to capture her words, she used every ounce of strength left in her battered body. "He did this on purpose," she rasped, her voice hoarse and uneven. The words scraped against her throat, but she forced them out anyway. Her lips trembled, but her eyes burned with an intensity that could not be extinguished. The room was silent, the weight of her words settling like lead, a confession from beyond the grave, a voice that refused to be silenced. The nurses exchanged glances, their eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and awe. One of them reached out, adjusting the recorder to ensure they caught every syllable. Judy's gaze never wavered. She had been given a second chance, not at life, but at justice, and she would not waste it. For the next 2 years, Judy fought to stay alive, enduring 59 agonizing surgeries. Each procedure felt like torture, her body sliced open, stretched, and stitched together in a desperate attempt to restore what Michael had destroyed. The pain was indescribable, waves of searing agony that no amount of medication could fully dull. She spent weeks in a medically induced coma after each surgery, her mind drifting between nightmares and waking horror. When she awoke, the suffering didn't stop. Nurses had to scrape away dead tissue daily to prevent infection, a process so excruciating that her screams echoed down the hospital halls. Other patients covered their ears, some cried, and the medical staff wept as they worked. knowing they were causing her unbearable pain but having no other choice. Her hands had been burned down to the tendons, making even the smallest movements unbearable. The once effortless actions of holding a cup of water, brushing her own hair, or caressing her daughter's faces were now impossible. The fire had stolen her body piece by piece, leaving behind only agony. But Judy refused to be silenced. With what little strength she had left, she recorded video testimonies from her hospital bed. The camera captured her hollowed eyes, her sunken cheeks, the raw, painful truth of her suffering. "I want the world to know what he did to me," she whispered in one recording, her voice barely more than a breath. "I want people to see his face and know he's a monster." The nurses wept as they watched her. Some had to leave the room, unable to bear witnessing the depth of her suffering. The doctors marveled at her resilience. How could someone who had lost so much still have the strength to fight, to speak, to stare into the lens of that camera, knowing the world would soon see her suffering in all its brutal reality? Judy endured every second of that agony for one reason: justice. She knew she wouldn't live to see Michael Slager behind bars for murder. Her body was failing, shutting down piece by piece. She could feel it in the way her lungs struggled for air, in the way her heart labored beneath her rib cage. Death loomed over her, whispering in the shadows of her hospital room. But before it came for her, she would make sure that her voice lived on. She spoke about the night of the attack, recalling every horrifying moment, how Slager had stood over her, watching her burn, not with horror, but with satisfaction. How she had begged for help, and how he had refused. "He knew," she said in another recording. "He knew what he was doing. He wanted me to suffer." There was no hatred in her voice, no anger, only the cold, undeniable truth. "He knew," she said in another recording. "He knew what he was doing. He wanted me to suffer." There was no hatred in her voice, no anger, only the cold, undeniable truth. As her story gained national attention, news outlets began covering her case. Her image, frail and broken yet still, somehow strong, flashed across TV screens and social media feeds. The world watched in horror, unable to turn away. People began calling for Slager to be charged with more than just assault. Judy wasn't just a victim of domestic violence. She was a victim of attempted murder. And when she finally succumbed to her injuries on June 27, 2017, there was no longer any doubt. Her recordings, taken from her hospital bed, became the most crucial evidence in the case. They were undeniable, chilling, a voice from beyond the grave, delivering testimony that no defense attorney could refute. Bonnie Bowes held on to those recordings like lifelines, her daughter's voice the only thing keeping her going. She had promised Judy that she would fight for justice. And when Slager's charges were upgraded to aggravated murder, she knew she had kept that promise. Judy's voice had not only ensured her attacker faced justice, it had changed history. She became the first murder victim in U.S. history to testify against her own killer. In life, Slager had tried to take everything from her. In death, Judy made sure he could never hurt another soul again. Judy Malinowski succumbed to her injuries on June 27, 2017, nearly 2 years after the attack that had left her body ravaged by flames, her spirit tested by unimaginable suffering. But even as her body failed, her resolve never wavered. She had done something no other burn victim had done before. She had prepared to testify against her murderer from beyond the grave. Before she passed, Judy made sure her voice would still be heard. From her hospital bed, she recorded a chilling and powerful testimony, recounting the horror of the day Michael Slager set her on fire. Her words, spoken through pain but filled with determination, would later serve as a haunting reminder of the brutality she endured and the justice she demanded. The legal system had failed her once before. When Slager was initially charged, he received a mere 11-year sentence, an insult compared to the life sentence Judy was already serving in the form of agonizing surgeries and endless pain. But as her condition worsened, authorities re-examined the case. This wasn't just an assault. This was murder in slow motion. With Judy's death, Slager's charges were upgraded to aggravated murder. The trial that followed was unlike any other. As the courtroom filled with jurors, reporters, and Judy's loved ones, there was an undeniable sense that history was about to be made. Never before had a victim testified posthumously in their own murder trial. When Judy's recorded deposition played, the room fell into complete silence. Every person present, including the judge and jury, sat frozen as her weak yet unwavering voice filled the courtroom. Her words cut through the air like a knife, recounting every horrific detail of the attack. "He knew exactly what he was doing," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "He told me he was going to kill me, and then he did." The jury listened in stunned silence as Judy described how Slager doused her in gasoline during an argument, how he flicked open his lighter without hesitation, how the flames devoured her body within seconds. She recalled the excruciating pain of her skin burning away, the helplessness as she collapsed, and the chilling moment when she realized Slager was watching her suffer without a hint of remorse. Slager, sitting just feet away, couldn't escape her words. He shifted uncomfortably, his once cocky demeanor cracking as Judy's voice forced him to relive the crime. The jury could see it. This was a man who had believed he had silenced his victim, only to find her voice more powerful than ever. Prosecutors built their case around Judy's testimony, ensuring that every gruesome detail was seared into the minds of the jurors. They showed disturbing photos of Judy's burned body, her flesh barely clinging to life in the immediate aftermath of the attack. They played emergency calls, her voice barely recognizable as she gasped for help. They introduced evidence that Slager had tried to manipulate the narrative, spinning lies about how the fire had started. But Judy's testimony had already exposed the truth. Her family sat in the courtroom, clutching one another's hands as they listened to her final words. Bonnie Bowes, Judy's mother, held back tears, her heart breaking all over again as she heard her daughter relive the nightmare. But she also felt pride. Judy had refused to be silenced. She had fought, even from her deathbed, to make sure Slager faced the consequences of his actions. The defense tried desperately to poke holes in the testimony, questioning the credibility of a statement made by someone who was not alive to be cross-examined. But it was futile. Judy's words, spoken with first-hand knowledge of her suffering, carried more weight than any of Slager's weak demeanors. After weeks of gripping testimony, the jury was sent to deliberate. The weight of Judy's words hung over the courtroom like a storm cloud. Would justice finally be served? The answer came swiftly. In July 2018, the verdict was announced, guilty of aggravated murder. The tension in the courtroom shattered as tears, gasps, and sighs of relief filled the air. Then came the sentencing. The judge, his voice firm and unwavering, declared that Slager would spend the rest of his days behind bars. Life in prison, no parole, and no second chances. Slager barely reacted, but the world around him did. Judy's loved ones sobbed, overwhelmed with emotion. Justice had not failed her this time. Outside the courthouse, reporters crowded around Bonnie Bowes, asking for her thoughts. Through her tears, she spoke the words that would define Judy's legacy. Judy did this. She made sure he could never hurt anyone else. Even in death, she won. Judy Malinowski had fought her final battle, and she had won. Her voice had not only sent her murderer to prison, it had changed the legal system forever. And because of her, no victim would ever be truly silenced again. Judy's story didn't just end with Slager's conviction. While the gavel had fallen and justice had been served in the courtroom, her impact was only beginning. Her mother, Bonnie Bowes, was left not just with the grief of losing her daughter, but also with a fire of her own, one that burned with purpose. She refused to let Judy's suffering be in vain. Instead, she channeled her pain into action, ensuring that what happened to Judy would never happen to another woman without consequence. Bonnie quickly became an outspoken advocate for domestic violence and burn victims, using every opportunity to speak about Judy's story. She met with lawmakers, stood in front of cameras, and shared the most harrowing details of her daughter's ordeal. She wanted the world to understand the horrifying reality of what Judy had endured, how a single moment of violence could lead to years of unthinkable suffering. One of Bonnie's greatest victories came in the form of legislative change. She worked tirelessly to push for new laws that would impose stricter penalties on offenders who commit severe burn attacks. Her determination, along with the national attention Judy's case had garnered, led to the passing of Judy's Law in Ohio. Before Judy's Law, criminals who inflicted devastating burns on their victims often received light sentences that did not match the severity of their crimes. Slager himself had initially received only 11 years, a punishment that paled in comparison to the horror Judy had suffered. With the new law in place, penalties for such crimes became significantly harsher, ensuring that perpetrators faced longer prison terms and could not so easily evade justice. The journey to getting Judy's Law passed was not easy. Bonnie had to relive her daughter's trauma over and over again, telling Judy's story to lawmakers, pleading for change. She stood before state legislators, her voice firm but filled with emotion, describing in excruciating detail what her daughter had endured. She showed them pictures of Judy's burned body, photos so graphic and heartbreaking that they left hardened politicians visibly shaken. She played clips of Judy's recorded testimony, forcing those in power to hear her daughter's frail but unwavering voice demanding justice. The fight for Judy's Law wasn't just about legislation. It was about changing the way people saw domestic violence and its long-term effects. For too long, society had viewed abuse as something that could be escaped with a restraining order or police intervention. Judy's story made it clear that some forms of domestic violence were more than just short-term tragedies. They were life sentences for the victims, even if they survived. After months of pushing, Ohio lawmakers could no longer ignore the call for justice. On July 19, 2017, Judy's Law was officially signed into law by Ohio Governor John Kasich. As Bonnie stood beside him, tears welled in her eyes. The fight had been grueling, but she had done it for Judy, for her granddaughters, and for every victim who could not fight for themselves. But Bonnie's work did not stop with Ohio. She continued to fight, working with national organizations to push for similar laws across the country. She attended conferences, partnered with advocacy groups, and sat down with survivors, listening to their stories and offering them hope. Her mission was clear. She would not stop until the world was a safer place for victims of domestic violence. Judy's story reached beyond legal reforms. It touched hearts across the nation. She became a symbol of resilience, a beacon of strength for victims everywhere. Her face appeared in news stories, in articles, and on social media, where thousands shared her story, vowing to stand against domestic violence in her name. Organizations dedicated to helping burn victims and abuse survivors adopted Judy's cause, using her story to spread awareness and fundraise for medical treatments, shelters, and support services. Hospitals and burn centers honored Judy, using her case as an example of the extreme dangers of domestic violence and the importance of early intervention. Survivors who had once suffered in silence now felt emboldened to speak up, inspired by Judy's courage. Her impact was especially profound among women and young girls who had faced abuse. Many reached out to Bonnie, sharing their own experiences, thanking her for giving them a voice. Some credited Judy's story with giving them the strength to leave their abusers before it was too late. But perhaps the most personal part of Judy's legacy was the impact she left on her daughters. She had hung on for them, fighting through unimaginable pain just to have a little more time with them. In her final months, every breath, every moment she endured was for them. She wanted them to know she loved them, that she had done everything she could to stay with them just a little longer. Her daughters, though young, understood the strength of their mother. They grew up knowing their mom had been a fighter, that she had stood up for justice even in the face of death. Bonnie made sure they would never forget who their mother was, not just a victim, but a warrior. Even in death, Judy Malinowski's voice was heard. It echoed in the halls of justice, in the whispers of survivors finding their courage, in the changed laws that bore her name. She had been silenced by violence, but in the end she spoke louder than ever before. Judy's legacy is one of justice, strength, and unbreakable love. She did not just endure. She fought, she changed lives, and she ensured that no other victim would have to suffer in silence. And because of her, the world will never forget her name. Judy Malinowski's bravery and resilience continue to inspire people worldwide. Her story is a haunting reminder of the devastating consequences of domestic violence, but also a testament to the power of the human spirit. Though she did not live to see justice served, her voice ensured that her murderer was held accountable. If you were moved by this story and want to hear more true crime cases, subscribe to Crime Docket and turn on notifications. Together, we can bring awareness to victims, fight for justice, and ensure that their voices are never forgotten.